And then we'll eventually work our way down to Greece and then into the Mediterranean and then find, I don't know exactly how, a way from Crete to Alexandria and then up the Nile. And then from there into Jordan and Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Oman. And then there's a ship that'll get us to Madagascar.
A storyteller, a National Geographic Explorer and science journalist takes an epic journey exploring all 7 continents, never by jet. 600 days of adventure so far, I think 120,000 miles of traveling and 5 continents. You're talking here about a huge epic trip.
The whole idea behind the trip really was I wanted to travel in a way that was different than the way everybody else traveled. That's when the idea came to me. I thought, okay, let's travel the way people traveled 110 years ago. And that will encourage us to be moving slowly through places, through countries, through geology and history, everything more slowly. And therefore, we're going to absorb more of it. And we're going to enjoy more of it. And sometimes we're going to have a hard time with it, but it'll make it a good story. The storytelling part of me, the writer part of me, like that idea.
Welcome to the Winging It Travel podcast with me, James Hammond. Every Monday, I'll be joined by guests to talk about their travel stories, travel tips, backpacking advice, and so much more. Are you a backpacker, gap year student, or simply someone who loves to travel? Then this is the podcast for you, designed to inspire you to travel. There'll be stories to tell, tips to share, and experiences to inspire. Welcome to the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. I'm joined by Chip Walter, an author, journalist, a National Geographic Explorer, filmmaker, and former CNN bureau chief. Chip's current project is the Vagabond Adventure, a journey into the vast beauty, complexity, and diversity of our planet and the remarkable people and cultures that live there. It's a personal pilgrimage with 2 intensely curious souls, traveling all 7 continents, never by jet, one day, one culture, one experience at a time. Chip, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. Tell the listeners, where are you right now?
We're home, oddly. We haven't been home very much lately, but when we made this agreement with my wife and I made this agreement, I came to her and I said, let's travel the whole planet, but never travel by jet. And I thought she would tell me I was insane. But she said, okay, let's do it. But I have only one thing that I need to be able to do. I have to go back and see my mother. And of course, I love her too. So that's all good. And so occasionally we do that. And then we also agreed that if we had some other work that we had to do, we both are working. Cyndy has a art business. I'm a writer. So I have projects going, that we might have to come back for that every so often. And my last book just came out. So that was another reason to come back for a bit. And then Annie, our youngest, is getting married. So that's very important to come back for.
Can you get away with missing your daughter's wedding? I mean, if you gave the excuse that you're traveling in the depths of Patagonia, is that an acceptable excuse?
No, especially since they asked me to officiate.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, Cyndy and I probably would never. Yeah, we'd be back no matter what for any of them. We have 3 daughters, all of them we'd be back for.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, I'd like to go back to the backstory of my travelers on the podcast. So I'd love to know where you initially grew up and was travel part of your upbringing? Yeah,
well, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the U.S., which is kind of a all-American city, I guess. And I was surrounded by woods, and so my mother and father were just kind of, I'd have breakfast in the summertime, and I'd just disappear into the woods. I loved that. There's the story that my mother used to tell where when I was 3 years old, whenever I guess she'd gone off downtown and I wanted to, they had a caregiver with me, a woman that worked with us. And I said, well, where's my mom? And she said, well, she's downtown. And I said, okay. And I just got like 2 cookies and got on my trike and took off. And they found me like a couple of hours later on the street. And I don't know where I was going or where I thought my mother really was or what downtown was or anything, but I didn't think about it. I just thought, well, okay, let's go. And And that's I think people who love to travel are really basically more than just travelers. They're intensely curious people, period.
Mm.
And travel just becomes one way for them to satisfy their curiosity. So I think that for me, that was a lot of it. I mean, all you had to do was say, let's go somewhere. And I was up, I was in, you know. I loved going to the beach as a kid. I loved car rides. I mean, anything because it was different, and you were going to learn something new. And so I just think some people are built that way, and I guess I'm one of them.
Yeah, I remember being based in London, right, when I was studying. And I used to see like the kids that were, in their teenage years, and they just dot about around London on the tube. And I think, oh, that they're traveling like an hour in terms of actual travel time to a completely different part of London. Whereas where I grew up, it's quite small town. It takes me 20 minutes to walk from my house where I used to live into the city
Yeah,
centre. And that was a journey, don't get me wrong, but it's like the one you could do all the time and it's quite set in stone. But with somewhere like London, I think, God, they're going like northeast London, southwest, like all these places that you kind of hear about on TV, but they're just going there every day. Just found it a bit mind blowing, really. Like that adventure of just going to a completely new area.
yeah, and then the older you are, and the more you're able, you just begin to expand your world. I mean, honestly, if we could go to the moon, I'd say let's go there too. So this journey is, proving to be really interesting because we're trying to get through all seven continents, and it takes time. When you're not traveling by jet, it's it's a whole different experience.
Yeah, we'll come to much more of those details in a bit. I'm really keen to know how it's gone and what's coming up. And
Yeah.
also, when you were kind of growing up into adulthood, was the interest in travel starting to take a bit more of a serious turn in terms of your thinking, maybe I can go to New York City or other states in America or even international? Like, were you thinking along those lines going into adulthood?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, as soon as I saw a map and you could see the world, and you could see other states. I mean, the United States is a big country. It's like
Yeah.
Australia. So you just see those places and you go, well, I want to go there. And finally, I really got a chance to do it whenever I got to cable news network. Uh, you know, the job just required that I start traveling around the country. So I spent a lot of time, traveling around the United States. And then when I got into documentaries, that's when I really was able to start to travel the world. And I could go to the Australian outback. I went to
Mm.
the Amazon, went to Africa, Tanzania, and you begin to think when you're doing that, oh wow, I'm really getting around. And then you look at a map, and then you go, oh really? I've been nowhere. I've been nowhere. I've been to this place, this place, this place. But so that that sort of got it was what got on my mind, and traveled a lot of other individual places over my life, but whenever whenever I was finishing Immortality Inc., which was the book before the one I just came out with, I said to Cyndy, I said, let's just hit the road and do it in a different way and
Mm.
try to cover a whole lot of ground, and that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was speaking to my friend the other day who's from China, right? He's from Beijing. And
Uh-huh.
I said to him that people say, yeah, I've been to China. But I'm like, China's huge. Like there
Right.
is an unbelievable amount of places within China you can go to, and they have an amazing train network, right? So you can get around a train on the
Stay there
bullet
for
train.
years,
Yeah,
years,
years.
years.
Like you could literally spend years there.
Easily. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just
I've
crazy how
been
big
I've
these
been to
places
China,
are.
and I think I've been to Beijing and Xi'an,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's not the same as saying you've really been to China.
Yeah. It's high on my list actually, to do 3 or 4 months. I don't know what the tourist visa length is, but whatever that length is, I'd probably maximize it and try and see as much as I can because that country is massive. As
Yes.
as
Yeah.
as USA and Australia and places like this,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. And there's so much history and everything there. It's
Oh yeah, yeah. You can really deep dive, right? Almost too many places, right? You can never really see anywhere. Oh, I do kind of wonder with the podcast, like, would you rather be seeing all the different countries or being like an expert in one country, like really deep dive in one area or like one continent? I don't know what's um the cooler idea, going to more places, different places, or just sticking to one area and really knowing that really well.
yeah. I think for me, part of my problem is I want both.
Yeah.
Uh,
Don't we all?
but it's very hard to have both. Um, so that was one of and I we'll get into this whenever you're ready, but that was one of the reasons for slow traveling.
Mm,
Uh, but there are people I know who say, well, okay, I checked off Iceland, I checked off Morocco, I checked off, or I checked off Africa because they were in, one place in Africa. Um, but so, I think we all want much more than that. Real true travelers want, they want to dig in, but they also want to see lots of places. So I guess we're trying to do a little bit of both with what we're trying to do.
yeah, just talk to us a little bit before we get to sort of the travel aspect in terms of your career. You mentioned that you're doing the media. Was that out of love of broadcasting or writing? Like, how did you get into the media space?
I started out as a newspaper writer.
Okay.
Really, I was a literature major, so all I really wanted to do was just somehow find a way to make a living writing.
Yeah.
And so I got into. I started out writing newspapers, and then I wrote for magazines, and then I got hired by a local television station, a CBS station here in Pittsburgh, and I was working there for a few years. I was the assignment editor, and I got asked one day out of nowhere a phone call that said, "Hey, we're starting this new cable news thing that Ted Turner started. Would you like to? We'd like to hire you." So I was like, "Wow, I wonder what
Hmm.
that's about." I mean, it sounds crazy now. Everybody knows who CNN is,
Yeah.
but nobody knew what it was, and a lot of people thought it would tank. My boss at KDKA, where I was working, certainly thought it would tank. But I went down and I did the interview, and I said, "Yeah, sure, let's give it a shot." Again, I think that people that are curious and like to travel, they're also eternal optimists.
Yes.
So you just assume that everything's going to go well. Uh, Sometimes they don't, but Cable News Network did, and that was how I got into that. And then as a result, I got into producing, and then I was the assignment editor on the national desk, and then I was a bureau chief in Los Angeles, and then San Francisco before I finally just burned out and moved on to documentaries.
Yeah, that's my next question. How hardcore was the work in terms of hours, and how did it affect your life? Either like in terms of time, but also travel leisurely, right? Because I guess you're working a lot, you're traveling a lot for work, but did you ever get time to do anything for yourself?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, it was really crazy because it was actually when Cable News Network was starting. I was there the day we went on the air. Um, and so we were just making it up as we went along. And when you have 24 hours of news,
Yeah.
it's monstrous, black hole that has to be filled with news. Nobody had ever done anything like that before. Everybody had their half-hour newscasts or their 1 hour newscasts, sometimes 15-minute newscasts. And so we were just running all the time. And it was exciting. It was an interesting time to be there. Anything was possible. But on the other hand, after, a few years at it, day in and day out, working,
Mm.
12, 15 hours a day, and there's high adrenaline. I just finally said, I need to do something where I can really sink my teeth into something. And documentaries were the opposite, really of cable news network, where you were just cranking out news, different news every day. And with documentaries, you'd spend a year just researching and figuring out how you were going to make the film.
Yeah, true. And do you think anyone in the CNN type of industry can survive that long, or is it always burnout for everyone who's involved? Like, do you know people who are still there now from when you started?
Yeah, there were a few people that lasted, like 35, 40 years, and there
Wow.
are a couple that are even nice. Um, But I do remember being in cable news network and thinking, I think only the insane survive here because it was so, uh, I mean, you had to be a particular kind of person to love that and dig into it day in and day out, especially there and especially at that time. I'm sure it's more calm now, but at that time, I thought, I'm not sure I want to be here for 10 or 20 or 30 years, so it was good. It was great. It was a terrific experience. I learned a ton. I met a lot of great people. I got to travel around the states, and I learned a lot about myself.
Yeah.
But it was really time to do something that I'd always really wanted to write books,
Yeah.
but I was too busy making a living, and so documentaries started to get me closer to that, where I could really dig into something.
Okay. So that kind of leads me nice on to my next area of the conversation, which is basically post CNN, and that's like books, making films, travels, National Geographic. So I'm going to start with probably not in the right chronological order, but maybe just what I researched in order, pretty much. I'm going to start with books because I love books, and I
Yeah.
picked a couple that you've released that kind of piqued my interest, and then we'll talk about your latest book as well, which I don't think is on the notes, but we'll talk about that after
Great.
these two. So the first one I've got is Immortality Inc. And the reason I picked this is because this is about aging, where
Mhm.
people are trying to, in quotation marks, cure aging, or at least try and bypass it, or at least make them live longer than the norm. It's just intriguing and scary at the same time. I'm like, how do you even begin to write this book? Like, where do you start? Like, how do you even come up with a concept?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, with the science documentaries that I had worked on, and then the science books that I worked on,
Mm.
the thing about science for me was, and again, I was a literature major, so it was something that kind of came to me later, possibly because of literature. I mean, you could read libraries full of books explaining why we are the way we are or how we solve problems. Philosophy, theology, psychology. But the questions that started to come to me were, well, you know, what's the science behind why we do what we do or how we solve a problem?
Mhm.
And so it immortality kind of fell out of the other books that I had written, and I started to look around, and I would see articles about aging and how science was trying to solve the problem here and there, and I thought, are we at a time in human history when, I mean, we've solved a lot of problems. Was this like the big one that we could
Mhm.
really solve? Would science be able to figure out a way to stop the human clock? And if it did, then what would happen?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what was in my head. I thought, well, is there anybody out there that can tackle this? Who really, not just snake oil, because there's a lot of but some really serious scientists who might be able to tackle this. And right around when I started thinking about it, news came out that Larry Page at Google, one of the founders of Google, had met with a guy named Art Levinson, who was the chairman of Apple, but also the chairman of Genentech, which was the first biotechnology company. And they had come to him and asked him if he felt he could create a company that could solve aging, because Google wanted to tackle these giant problems, what they call moonshots. And when I read about Art Levinson, first of all, Google says, okay, we're going to give you tons of money to tackle this. And then when I learned about Art Levinson, he was really fascinating because, well, being chairman of Apple and all of that, but he was a serious microbiologist. And so and then Craig Venter, the scientist that first sequenced the human genome, and Ray Kurzweil, who's a very well-known futurist and inventor, who really was the first scientist to say we don't have to die. Um, and Aubrey de Grey and another scientist named Robert Hariri, who is probably one of the world's leading stem cell experts. So these guys, when I was able to track them down and they agreed to talk to me and allowed me to get into their labs and really spend time with them, I thought, okay, these are real. serious scientists, and if anyone's going to solve this problem, it's going to be them. So I mean, there are other scientists I could have seen, but I kind of focused on these, and I really got into their stories because I wanted to know, well, why would you think you could solve this problem? What makes you think you're capable of tackling that problem? And so it just got very interesting to me. I just started digging. I spent hours and hours and hours with all of these people, and I spent time in their labs, and I talked to all the other people, and I learned everything about their lives. And one of the things I thought was interesting about it was that most of them had lost someone important in their lives early in their lives. So the
Right.
idea of death had a big effect, emotional effect on them. In the case of Craig Venter, he actually tried to commit suicide and then realized as he had swum out miles out and when he was in Vietnam out into the ocean to get away from he was working with as a medic
Oh, wow.
and he just couldn't take the slaughter anymore
Yeah.
and then he got out there and a shark bumped up against him and it's like a light bulb went off and he said, "Oh my God, I want to live," So he almost died swimming back. But that had a huge effect on his life. So anyhow, I thought those stories were fascinating, and then getting into the science of how they were tackling it and could they tackle it, and I think they'll solve it. I don't know if these particular scientists will solve it, but I think science will solve it. And what I've say to people is, I mean, a lot of people will say, "Well, do I really want to live that long?"
Yeah.
And I think, well, people think that they're going to be decrepit and just get increasingly old.
Yeah.
And that's not the idea here. The idea is to stop aging and to reverse it. Uh, and so then I ask people, I go, "Well, if you're 35 years old, how would that be?" And then they go, "Oh, well, that's different." And the truth is, I mean, I wrote about this after the book came out. The truth is, if you if someone walks up to you and unless you're in horrible pain or something, they walk up to you and they say, "Here, I have a pill, and with this pill, you'll be able to live, hundreds more years, perfectly healthy." I mean, I don't think there are very many people who are going to say, "Nah, I think I'll pass."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I think that whether or not we like it, as this happens with a lot of technologies, once they're here, and we better just figure out how we're going to deal with it. Because I get that question a lot. I go, "Well, aren't there going to be too many people, or how are you going to pay for, living for hundreds
Yeah.
of years, whatever?" And I don't know what the answers to that are. I think that we can probably solve them, but we better start thinking about it now because I think it's going to happen, and it's probably going to happen within the next 10 to 15 years.
That's crazy.
And I think we're already making progress now. So yeah, it is. It's going to be a crazy century.
And the fact we have a population decline, right, worldwide, that's
Yeah, yeah. I mean, truthfully, the rate of growth has been dropping since the 1980s, but there's so many people, the number of people
yeah.
continues to increase, but it is slowing down. And as countries become more financially stable and as people become better educated, fewer and fewer people, are born. So
Hmm.
that seems to be a massive trend globally.
You can't imagine it, can you? That you can just like live for over 200 years. Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah,
I put a question here. What's the future of the human race? That's a really generic question, but in line with the book, I guess if they figure this out and people have access to this, I guess my actual question would be the access to, let's say, a pill, just for basic sake, right? There's a pill
right,
available in your current state, healthy, whatever, for 200 years. Like, who
right.
has access to that, and how easily accessible it would be for normal people in the street, or is it only for rich people?
Right. I think that what we see, what you see over time in history is that initially new technologies are first come to the rich.
Yeah.
Uh, and they actually become, in a way, excellent guinea pigs for whatever the
Yeah.
technology is. But once it starts to go mainstream, prices drop, and the stuff becomes much more universally, maybe not as universally available as it should be, or we would like it to be, and hopefully
Mm.
we'll get better at that. But generally, that's what kind of happens. I mean, just take a simple example, the car. Used to be that a couple of people have had Stanley steamers, and a couple of rich people had high-end cars, and then Ford figured out how to create the assembly line and make
Yeah.
them cheaper, and then they became available to everyone. Whether we liked it or not, that's what happened. Same thing with cell phones, with cable, television, all sorts of drugs, penicillin, those kinds of things. So I think generally that's the way it goes. Again, I'm not sure it goes perfectly well, but
Yeah.
hopefully this will become available universally. Certainly should be that way,
Yeah,
but it's
absolutely.
not right now. It's not right now. I
Oh
mean,
God,
people
no.
benefiting from this are very, very wealthy people.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, Next book of yours, which kind of is loosely related to this, right? In a sort of, if you swap it around, is The Last Ape Standing. This piqued my interest because this is about the journey of human beings.
Yes.
I got a thing here that like, do you find it incredible that we are like us two as an example? We're alive today because the DNA inside us has kind of reached this point, and like millions of years of struggle, right? Or that hundreds of thousands of years of struggle, and we get to
Yes.
this point, and I kind of think it's quite incredible what it's gone through, right, to get to this point now.
Yes, yes. I mean, that was one of the fascinating things. I mean, I actually wrote the book partly because of the research I had been doing and writing I had been doing about high technology. I began to realize that there's this collision between human behavior and the technologies that we create. Sometimes it doesn't go well.
Mm.
Uh, and so I thought, for us to really be able to properly use technology as powerfully as we do, we should probably get a better handle on what makes us tick. Where did we come from? Why are we this? I mean, let's face it, we are a strange creature. I
Yeah.
mean, there's nothing else on the planet like us. There are no other animals on the planet that are building huge cities or going to the moon. So, that really got into my head. I thought, well, and it goes back to that idea of, not philosophy, not theology, but like, what are the real answers? And so I just spent years doing research for that book. Had a lot of fun writing it. But what it really comes down to is what makes us tick. Why are we the way we are? And what I found was that, it's about 7 million years ago, the first, what are known as hominins, or upright apes,
Yeah.
begin to appear. And so I sort of made that the beginning of the story and tried to tell that story. And I found that there were 27 at the time when I was writing the book. I think it's closer to 29. There's probably many more than that. Uh, of hominins existed over time. And so then we wondered, well, why did we make it? They're all gone now, all of them.
Hmm.
But why are we the last ape standing? Why are we still here? And and so that just turned out to be a kind of nice story. And then it also became a really nice way to explain how we emerged out of this and what made us different, and uh, and why some other creatures. I mean, Neanderthals are extremely bright, uh, but they didn't survive.
Yeah.
Same thing with Denisovans. The genetic evidence indicates that they were very, very smart. We don't know as much as we would like to know about them. The only reason we really know about us is because we're here.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's just fascinating to see. And you're right. I mean, we are married, and especially over the last 400,000 years, 500,000 years, we are married in some ways with these other creatures, and we benefit from their abilities. And it just got, I don't know if luck is the right word. Evolution is simply about things. Yeah, it is about luck in a way.
Yeah.
It's
I
like
think
you
so.
you get certain genes and they work, and so we figured out a way to be born early, because our brains were getting so large, we had to
Yes.
get through, to get through the birth canal, we had to be born really helpless. And that turns out to mean that unlike other apes, not necessarily Neanderthals, um, but other apes, we are born very early, and most of our brain development is outside the womb, not in the womb,
Mm.
which means that your personal experience shapes you much more than it would if you were born with, your DNA, or you just arrive and like a wildebeest and
Yeah.
you're up and running
Up and
and
running. Yeah.
yeah, and ready to go. So it turns out that made it much more difficult for us to survive, but we figured out other ways to survive. It became much more social, we had to be smart in order to survive. We almost didn't make it. I mean, 75,000 years ago, we were probably down to a couple thousand
Wow.
Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
But here we are. There's 8 billion of us now.
There's so many questions, isn't there, with that whole subject?
Yeah,
I think that's another podcast, but
I know. That's
yeah,
because you're curious.
yeah, of course, yeah, yeah. And also from the travel aspect, I don't know if you touched on this in the book, but obviously some of those early human beings started to migrate, right? And started to go and explore, which is quite an interesting one because you kind of question why, like why are you up and running and you don't know what's ahead of you. The fear of death is probably going to increase because you don't know your surroundings. Like, yeah, what's the thing inside those early guys that want to go, you know what, let's go and walk over there, I don't know, 1,000 miles, and what we know today is miles. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I really thought about that, and I thought about it even after the book came out because I thought, okay, why we went all around the planet. We started out in Africa in a little place, uh, and we went all the way around the planet, which is clearly not easy. I mean, it's not easy now,
Yeah,
not by
yeah,
jet. I mean, you didn't even have a ship or anything. It was
yeah.
just you and your feet. And I think what it really comes down to is I think that any creature wants to have control of their environment,
Hmm.
uh, because that gives you a better chance of surviving. And and so I think that's where our curiosity comes from. We want to be in charge of what's around us. And so that naturally leads to, well, what's around the bend? What's over the hill? What's beyond that mountain? And so I think, a lot of times people will say, well, we're just migrating because we're following the food. And, that certainly was probably true too.
Hmm.
But I do think that it's really like, okay, I need to know about that thing that I don't know about, because if I don't know about it, it might kill me. Uh, and so I think that's certainly a big part of why we're so curious, and it's really built into us. We're what I call infovores. We have to have information,
Yeah.
or we just can't. It really bugs us if we don't have it.
Which kind of leads me to the next question. Why do you think there's some people like me and you like today and
Mhm.
others the last, I don't know, 150 years of the great exploration? Like, why do we feel the need to travel as much as opposed to some people you might know, and definitely some people I know who have no interest and are happy staying in one place and that's it? Like, why is there that difference, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've talked with people like that, and well, first of all, again, I think that we're travelers are innately curious. So it's almost like you just want to see a different place, hear a different sound. Um, but it just makes you feel good because it's different, and it satisfies your curiosity. It's exciting. It broadens your thinking.
Hmm.
It's ineffable. It's hard to put your finger on it, but those are the kinds of things that I think of whenever I say, "Wow, I can't wait to get up today and go see something new." Uh, but I think there are people who don't really want things that are new.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why, like, I differentiate between travelers versus tourists, um, because my definition of tourism is you leave the place you're at to go somewhere else so that it's like the place you're at, um, instead of a traveler who goes to find things that are different from where they're home is. And so I think there are a lot of people a lot of people would say to me and Cyndy, they'd say, well, weren't you scared or weren't you afraid that something bad was going to happen? And, there was not anything in particular they were worried about, and so I think fear is
Hmm.
an issue. I think some people are just very comfortable because again, it's a control thing. You go, I understand where I live. I understand what I do. I like that world. I don't know if they're comfortable with it or not, but for whatever reason, it's like I'm good. I don't need to see anything else. I feel fine. Uh, and to those people, I would say, man, you're missing out on a lot. But if that's what you want to do, that's up to you.
Yeah, it's very interesting your definition there of tourist. Yeah, I straddle both, right? I think I do both.
Yeah,
But I think if I'm in the tourist mode, I'm almost having a break. I think I'd see that.
right,
It is seeing something new, and it can be like, physically you're walking 10,000 steps, whatever a day. But in terms of the experience, it's not quite dissimilar to where I live now in Vancouver, for example, right? There's going to be a park,
right.
there's gonna be coffee places, there's going to be water. It's going to be fairly new, fairly the same. I think that's what I see tourists as, and that could be different from just booking an all-inclusive, staying there for a week and not actually moving, or just
Yeah,
like booking a city break. If you live in a city already to somewhere new in the US, for example, it's going to be same, isn't it? Just a tiny bit different. So yeah, the
right,
traveler aspect is very, you're kind of exploring, aren't you? It's that explorer mentality.
right. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I've done it. Cindy and I've done it. We just go. We actually have said before we even started this journey, you know, there are different kinds of vacations.
Yeah.
And so some vacations are go to, a resort and get on the beach and pull out your books and that's it, and that's you're there for a particular reason and that reason is to punch out, which definitely people need to do. And then there are historical, vacations, or there are just hiking vacations,
Yeah.
or and they're different. In the case of what we're doing, we're sort of getting all of it. And sometimes, we'll be somewhere and we'll go, well, this is nice, and we're tired, so we're just going to stay here, and we sort of do a little mini punch out in the middle of the trip.
Love that. Okay. Awesome. Let's bring it back to travel slightly. No, actually, before that, can you tell us about your latest book? Then we'll go to travel.
Yeah, this book really, it's a novel. It's my first novel, and it really comes out of, it's in some ways a sequel to the other books that I've written, even though they're nonfiction. But I spent a lot of time, obviously researching different kinds of science over the years, and I just had this story idea that came to my mind, and I kind of weave a lot of the knowledge that I gained into what I wanted to create was just a good page-turning futuristic thriller.
Nice.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so that's what it is. It's called Doppelganger, and I guess the simplest way to the kernel of it is that it's a time in the world where you could download a human mind into a cyborg body,
Okay.
and so this guy basically wakes up thinking he just woke up that morning, but it turns out that he's been murdered, and he is the doppelganger. He's the backup. He's the downloaded version of himself, and he has to solve his own murder. And it gets way bigger and much more complicated than that. But so it really kind of comes out of some of those issues in Immortality Inc. and some of the years and years ago, I had met a scientist out of Carnegie Mellon University who was the first scientist to say someday we will be able to download a human mind into a machine.
God.
And I
Okay.
thought, well, what if you do that and you do it on a Friday and then you're murdered over the weekend and you wake up, you go, how do you solve that? What do
Yeah.
you do? And I would think you'd be pretty upset. So I kind of ran with that premise, and people have been really enjoying the book, and it does kind of look at what's the next stage of humanity. It's like, Neanderthals didn't make it. Maybe we won't either.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
a
absolutely.
new kind of creature that will emerge and evolve.
Oh, there's so many possibilities. I was just thinking when you mentioned about someone getting murdered, like if you had that drug where you can live another 200, 300 years, is that exclusively only for people who aren't criminals? Because then would you run the
Ah,
risk of giving it to criminals as loosely as, someone who doesn't do something as bad as murder, but I don't know, stealing something, right? As opposed to
right,
murdering someone, like are those guys banned from having it because they've been criminalized by
right.
human
Yeah,
court?
that would be the ultimate sentence, wouldn't it? You
Yeah.
don't you
Yeah.
don't get to keep living, basically.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
Oh,
wow.
I like that.
Should have thought.
Yeah, yeah.
And he could be innocent. Oh, oh well. Yeah. Okay, let's bring it back to travel.
All right.
So after CNN, you went to National Geographic to work on a few things, and that was as a filmmaker, right? And a documentary maker. So what were some of the angles or stories that you worked for with those guys?
Right. Well, so after I left Cable News Network, oddly, strangely, I met the producer that had gone to Carl Sagan with the idea for Cosmos. This was a long time ago. I literally ran into him while I was at CNN on the street. And we got talking. And when I found out that's what he was doing, I was like, wow, I just would love to get into that. And so it took a few years, but eventually he asked me to join a series called Planet Earth, which at the time in Los Angeles, WQED, which was a big PBS television station in the United States, had offices in Los Angeles, and they did all the National Geographic specials, and they were doing this series too. So I was just, bumping into National Geographic producers and photographers and everything all the time. And but we did this series called Planet Earth, was 7-part series, and I co-wrote and produced two of those with a guy from Britain called from BBC named Robin Bates, and we did those two. And the series won an Emmy, which was great. And then I co-developed with people at WQED another series called Infinite Voyage, which is all about science, and I did a documentary called Fires of the Mind, which is really what got me kind of led eventually to Thumbs, Toes, and Tears and Last Ape Standing. But it was really an exploration of the evolution of intelligence, which enabled me to go all over the world to do. And then I did a few other documentaries, and I was asked to develop a series there, and because I thought, well, I wanted to get into writing books. And so I developed a series called Space Age, and it was a big PBS series. And they asked me if I would executive produce the series, and I said, no, I'm going to write the book. And they said, well, there isn't a book. And I said, there will be a book. And I didn't know why, but then I got an email, or not an email. This was, I got a letter from an editor at Random House who had seen an article I wrote and said, I really liked your article. Would you like to write a book for us? And I said, oh, well, we have this series. And so that was my first book. And
Wow.
then that later led to a book with William Shatner, the technologies of Star Trek. And then one
Yeah.
thing led to another. And now we're into my sixth book.
Crazy. And for the
Very
travel
lucky.
aspect here, where's the where's the travel in this in terms of outside of these interests?
Yeah, well, I mean, once I started doing documentaries, the beauty of doing something that's called Planet Earth is, you get to go everywhere. So, I mean, we went to Indonesia, went to the Amazon rainforest, the outback of Australia, all over Europe, Tanzania, see the oldest fossils in Australia, the kind of the history of human intelligence in Africa. So that really opened up my mind. I remember someone, walking through the offices there saying, hey, Chip, how's it going? And I said, I'm traveling all over the world, meeting some of the most interesting people in the world. I go, really, what's better than that?
Yeah, absolutely. The dream, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was really great because not only did you get to travel, but you were exploring really interesting things and meeting really fascinating people. The only downside about it was that I was working. And so, what I really wanted to do is just go visit these places and explore them on my own and not really have to do anything. But that doesn't really work anyhow because I'm just, I love writing. So everything that we're doing now, I'm writing about it all the time. So it's still, in a sense, work, but it's good work. I like it.
Yeah, because my question here is, did you actually have time to travel for leisure in this sort of period of time where it's outside of the projects and you just have certain areas of the world that you may have been to through work, like you say, you want to go to explore more, or even new places you've not explored?
No, I didn't really. Yeah, we were so busy doing the projects that I did not get to travel much for leisure. Occasionally, you're there, so you might get a day,
Mm,
you're
mm.
able to explore something. But I think what it did more than anything for me was it just made me hungrier to, at some point, just do what I wanted to do, kind of the way I wanted to do it. And and I wanted to dig into it. And so, even when I started to get more time when I was writing books to just, take off with my kids on a vacation or with my wife, uh, you know, it still wasn't the same as what I really wanted to do. And that's how this journey kind of happened, because you still fly in and fly out, you know, um, if you're going on a
Yeah.
vacation somewhere,
Mm.
you can expand it a bit, but at some point you're saying, well, we're going to go away for 2 weeks, or we're going to go away for a week, or we're going to go, maybe if you're lucky, 3 weeks. But it's not the same as what we're doing now.
Which kind of brings you on to the Vagabond Adventure. Is that maybe the reason why you've taken the decision to kind of start this new adventure? I've got like a little blurb that says a storyteller, a National Geographic explorer, and science journalist takes an epic journey exploring all seven continents, never by jet. So that is 600 days of adventure so far, I think, 120,000 miles of traveling and five continents to date. You're
Right.
talking here about a huge epic trip.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a monster, but it's a really great one. And we started in at the very as soon as we could with COVID. As soon as we were allowed to travel. Period. I mean, we had all kinds of trips that were canceled because of COVID.
Yeah.
So Cyndy, my wife, said, our initial plan was to head down through the Caribbean and South America to Antarctica. It was going to be the first leg,
Yeah.
and COVID just killed all that because shipping stopped.
Yeah.
And since the whole idea behind the trip really was I wanted to travel in a way that was different than the way everybody else traveled. And that's when the idea came to me. I thought, okay, let's travel the way people traveled 110 years ago,
Mhm.
and and that will encourage us to be moving slowly through places, through countries, through geology and history and, everything more slowly. And therefore, we're going to absorb more of it, and we're going to enjoy more of it. And sometimes we're going to have a hard time with it,
Yeah.
but it'll make it a good story. The storytelling part of me, the writer part of me, liked that idea. We just decided. Cyndy said, "Well, look, if we can't head to Antarctica, then let's just start with the United States." And so we just started getting on trains, and we went all the way up to Newfoundland, and then came all the way across the United States, and all the way down to Baja, and then up to Vancouver, where you are,
Mhm.
and Victoria, and areas like that. And then finally, we were able to break out and get across the ocean. So we went immediately over and booked it to Morocco, uh, because it was exotic, at least, or that would and it was a wonderful trip. Um, And then we said, okay, that took about a year. So we said, all right, now let's reboot and head to Antarctica. And that was an epic journey in itself, just getting from the United States through the Caribbean and then all the way down through uh,
Yeah.
Peru and Chile and Patagonia and the Andes and the Atacama Desert and into Tierra del Fuego, and then finally making our way to Antarctica. And then within that year, we got all the way back up to Svalbard, which is the northernmost human habitation. Uh, and that took 6 months, of
Yeah.
travel to do. But we went pole to pole last year.
I've got some questions about those couple of places actually in a bit, but I've got some other questions about the trip. There's
Okay.
so many questions I've got. Do you have any hard rules? I know no flying is one. Day to day, is there certain things you're looking for, or is there experiences that you're booking in? Like, how do you get what you're after when you're going to new places day to day? Like, in terms of like, how long do you stay there? Because you're trying to do it slowly, right? So, how are you figuring it out over like the shorter time period?
Yeah. I mean, we have a very general, I set a very general kind of zigzaggy um, itinerary for the whole journey around the planet.
Hmm.
But you can't really avoid that if you're going to hit all seven continents. Um, and then beyond that, one of the kind of interior rules was let's look at places that we haven't been. Uh, so we didn't go back to Paris. We didn't spend, I mean, we went through Paris, we went through London, but we didn't spend a lot of time in those places because we'd been there and a lot of other places in Western Europe and some places in Mexico.
Yeah.
Um, and so we purposely tried to find places that we hadn't been, and we would avoid places we were more familiar with. And then otherwise, basically, we say, okay, well, this because we're not traveling by jet, we just kind of have to go through some places. Like we had to go through 2,000 miles in Argentina from Ushuaia, which is the very tip of South America,
Yeah.
to get to Montevideo,
Hmm.
Uruguay, so that we could take a ship from Uruguay across the Atlantic to get us to Europe. It was the only way that we could get on the other side of the Atlantic. We
Wow.
really wanted to go to Africa, but we couldn't find a ship that would do it. Uh, so we traveled to get to Montevideo. We traveled 2,000 miles on buses over 5 days. Frankly, it was brutal, but it was the only way that we could
Yeah.
get. And we saw a lot of fascinating places and interesting stories to tell and everything as we did it. Uh, and it certainly would have been easier to do if we were flying, but that's not what we were doing. So we had a whole nother experience. So in situations like that, sometimes you just have to get from point A to point B, and you run into whatever it is you run into to get there. And then once we're there, or as we're approaching, usually I'll do research about what we were looking for.
Yeah.
Like when we got to Peru, I really wanted, I had long ago had wanted to get, everyone goes to Machu Picchu.
Mm.
Um, I wanted to go to a place called Choquequirao, which is another Incan palace, but almost nobody goes there because it takes 4 days to go in and get out on foot
Yeah.
or mule. And so we did that, and then we saw Machu Picchu. Or trying to get to the Atacama Desert instead of, just hanging out by the beach, like,
Yeah, I randomly went there. Like, I had no plans, but I just thought, well, I was in northern Argentina, right? I had to get to Chile. And I was like, oh, what is this
Mhm.
place? I had no idea what the Atacama Desert really was. So I got a bus across. I almost was almost sick on the bus because of altitude, I think, but just about made it to San Pedro, the
Yeah.
Atacama. And I couldn't believe what this place was. Like, we're going out into Moon Valley and otherworldly.
Yes.
Never seen anything like it.
Yeah, it's a wild place, the driest place on the
Yeah.
planet.
Yeah. I didn't know
Um,
that.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's like less than an inch of rain a year. But but I loved it. I loved when we got there, and I remember just a bunch of goats, walking by as we
Hmm.
were, going to a little restaurant somewhere. Um, but that's, so again, that's the thing that makes it great. So, I mean, when you're in the middle of Chile, there's not necessarily a ton of history, but there's an enormous amount of geology. And
Yes.
Torres del Paine was amazing in Patagonia. Uh, but when you get to Europe, then there's tons of history, and I love history, so do research about all the little cities and towns, and getting all the way up to Norway and all the stories about Norway, and from Vikings to the way Norway has evolved now, and then getting into Estonia and the Balkan countries and all that history is all fascinating. We just kind of look at it and say, okay, we're going to go to this is the next place we're going. Here's the train that's going to get us there, or whatever it is that's going to get us there. And Cyndy usually helps to find a place for us to stay, and then we do it and start all over again, and just keep on moving around the planet. So we're about, I'd say, 45% of the way there.
That's kind of my next question. Is there a goal in mind in terms of maybe how many places, or I know 7 continents is on the list, but in terms of countries, is there a goal?
Yeah, well, one place that as we were, since we'll be heading back to Trieste, and then we'll be going down through Croatia and Albania and Macedonia and Montenegro into Greece, and then the Mediterranean, then cross into Alexandria and up the Nile. After that, our plan was to get a cargo ship that I knew that existed in Antwerp, and then go to Namibia, Africa. And unfortunately, they're all booked. COVID had closed.
Wow.
There are cargo ships that you can get on, and there used to be more of them. Now, because of COVID, they closed most of them down. So there are only a few cargo shipping companies that do that.
Right.
And so the next one we could get wouldn't be until 2026. So I had to kind of completely reboot. And now we'll be heading instead into Jordan, and then across Saudi Arabia into Oman and Dakar. And then there's a ship that we can get to that'll get us to Madagascar. And then from Madagascar, I'm not quite sure which way we're going to go. It's taking longer for us to get around the planet than I anticipated.
But is there any time constraint though? Do you have to get this done by a certain year? Like, do you have any of those?
There's not a hard time constraint, but there's so many books that I want to write that while I'm traveling, it's very hard to write about anything except to travel, because I'm just constantly taking notes.
Yeah.
And so probably know what that's like. And so it just eats you, all of your time is either traveling or writing about the travel, and sleeping. And so part of me really wants to do the trip. I don't want to rush through it, but I also don't want to take another 5 years to get it done. So one of the things Cyndy said was, well, let's make sure that we do what we intended to do, but let's not go to every place along the way, which I kind of tend to want to do. So
yeah, that we all know. Yeah.
But like you said, I mean, you could go to China and you could spend, an unbelievable amount of time there, years there. So really everything that we're doing is kind of touching on them, but it is touching on it more slowly. And again, as I said before, that a big part of this is just the journey. That's why we call it a pilgrimage, because it really is like something that changes you more than you change it. It's going around the world, is a different than any other travel I've done. So
you are managing to journal the whole journey, right? Each day almost.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm way behind on a lot of big chunks of it that I just haven't had time to get written. But so what I do is, I'll write a book about this, and probably more than one book. But so I'm keeping all the notes for that. But I have what are called dispatches. I have two different ways of sort of telling people what we're doing. One is a journal, a kind of more daily journal that plots as we're traveling. and I'm behind on that. But the other one are more in-depth dispatches, that are longer, they have more history, they have more stories than the journals. And then we're also on a thing called Polar Steps, which kind of
Oh yeah,
tracks.
we use that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a great way to track all the places you've been and can give people a quick picture of what we're doing.
Hey, yeah, just a quick one. I just want to say there are many ways to support this podcast. You can buy me a coffee and help support the podcast with $5, or you can go to my merch store with the affiliate link with TeePublic, where there's plenty of merch available to buy, such as t-shirts, jumpers, hoodies, and also some children's clothing. Thirdly, which is free, you can also rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podchaser, or Good Pods. Also, you can find me on social media on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. Simply just search for Winging It Travel Podcast, and you'll find me displaying all my social media content for traveling, podcast, and other stuff. Thank you.
Amazing. Okay, I picked out some places based on those because I'm really keen to hear what you think about them, because they're quite unique, maybe to me, or just I have a serious interest. The obvious one is Antarctica. I think people are aware it's going to be a huge journey in terms of cost, but also the way you get there in terms of by ship, right? So what is that place like when you land? Like, is it as otherworldly as you think in terms of how vast it is, what you see, how desolate maybe it is as well? Like, what were your feelings when you arrived?
Yeah, Cyndy, my wife instantly says it's the most amazing place that she's ever been. And it is truly otherworldly. I mean, first of all, one of the things that's interesting about it is that, like, we had to take a ship from Puerto Montt, and we took a ferry through parts of Patagonia, and then later a ship that took us through Tierra del Fuego to get to Ushuaia, Ushuaia is the kind of place where everybody takes off to go to Antarctica. So when you cross into Antarctica, you've got to cross the Drake Passage.
Drake Passage, yeah.
The Drake Passage is where three oceans come together. So they are the wildest waters in the world.
Whoa.
And we were at least told we were pretty lucky that we were there in the summertime. So it wasn't horrible, but you're still seeing 24-foot, swells. And so you're just spending 2 days, excuse me, you're spending 2 days, kind of bobbing up and down on the ship to get there. And then I remember, so, floors or doors are swinging all over the place. People are, moving left and right all over the place. And then we went to sleep and we woke up and it was dead quiet and nothing was moving. And I jumped up and I looked out the porthole, and all you saw was snow and huge mountains and glaciers. And it was perfectly clean and still, and icebergs just kind of floating by. And that right out of the gate, you're like, wow.
Yeah.
There was nothing like it I'd ever seen. The scale of things was just, mind-boggling. And then when you get out, I mean, you can't really, unless you're a scientist and you're working, at McMurdo Bay or someplace like that, you can't really stay there. I did try to get us to be able to camp at least a night or two there, but they're very rare. And that time of the year, you couldn't do it. So what you do is you get on Zodiac and you go out and you can explore and you go and see the penguins and you can, hike a bit and that sort of thing. And then we also got on kayaks and went out. And that particular day was unbelievable. And we saw 3 humpback whales go right by us, right under us.
Yeah.
It just,
wow.
It's hard to process it, and reasons why I like to write about it, because then I can really think about it and think about what it felt like and what it looked like. and the icebergs there are as big as mountains, and they're just floating by. I mean, you're humbled. You're tiny. You're completely unnecessary. uh, and you're incredibly lucky to be able to see what you're seeing.
I think with those icebergs, right? Because they're the size of mountains above water, that means they're huge below
Yeah,
water, right? I can't even imagine what that is.
something like 90% of the iceberg is below water, and
That
you're already
is,
looking at something that the size of a small mountain range. I mean, it's, you know, I don't know how, it's hard to even say how many feet they must be, but
yeah.
they're certainly several hundred feet high and several hundred feet wide, and you're just a little, your little zodiac is minuscule next to it. I mean, if anyone wants to go to the website, we have some great pictures of it.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the show notes so people can have a look. I've interviewed some people who've done Antarctica before, and they all say the same thing. So it's just one of those places that you just have to maybe visit soon before arguably it goes away. Not sure.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, it is. Yeah, the Ross Ice Shelf is probably going to go down. I don't know when, but within
Mm.
10 years.
Okay. And on days 548 and 549, you're in the Atlantic. And this intrigued me because you're out to sea for so long. I
Right.
can't really imagine what it's like to be out to sea for 20 odd days at a time.
Yeah.
And you've got one of the articles is there, or the blogs is the Doldrums of the South Atlantic, because it's known that area as just being wild, right? You are in the middle of nowhere. The swells can be huge. And I guess so many people have been lost over the last hundreds of years trying to navigate that, right?
Yeah. So when you reach that, you're beginning to approach the equator, and you're also pretty much in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, uh, which, you look at it on a map and you go, well, it's not much, but it took us 21 days to get there. So it's big. And and one of the reasons they call that the doldrums is because in that part of the world, when you were a sailing ship, it would often get very quiet and there would be no wind. And so they
Mm.
would just sit there. Sometimes it would sit there for weeks or I think, in some cases, months
Oh,
and just
wow.
couldn't go anywhere.
Huh.
And so that is not something that if you're a sailor or you're a, you're a sailing ship, that's not what you want. You want to be able to move.
Yeah.
So it would get depressing, uh, upsetting. It also was a place where a lot of slaves on slave ships would perish,
Right.
and that made it extra dark.
Yeah.
The idea of doldrums uh, comes up there too,
Mm.
in that history. So people would be dying and just tossed, overboard. Just horrible.
Yeah.
And uh, and so when you're there, I mean, there were certainly times where we saw big swells, but during the time that we were there in the doldrums, it's just humid and quiet. And if you didn't, I guarantee we wouldn't have been moving if it hadn't been for the fact that we had an engine that was
Yeah.
moving the
Yeah.
ship.
I never thought of that. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And then we cross the equator, and there's on this particular ship, I've been on other ships where they don't make as big a deal out of it, but on this particular ship, there's a kind of rite of passage. If you haven't crossed the equator, then you have to, no one has to go through it, but they used to do this with crews,
Hmm.
they throw fish offal at you and there's a whole ritual where you have to kiss the foot of Neptune and his wife, and there's a whole thing which I have some video of it, because some people had to go through it. Luckily, I had already done it, so I said, "Sorry, I already been across the equator."
Yeah.
But some people just did it for fun, and mostly it's just fun. It's an old rite of passage that I think started back with the doldrums, and it was just a way to get people, to have something to do and something to get excited about, in those days.
Is there anything unusual that happens, or is it just you just cross a bit of water and that's it? Like, is anything, I don't know, geographically, or do you feel anything?
No, no, don't
No.
feel anything. There's no big stripe in the ocean or anything that you pass. There's when you begin to get a little further north or south, depending on the direction you're going, your toilets begin to switch their direction
Right.
because gravity
Yeah.
just changes. The poles change.
Yeah.
Uh, but it is really, really interesting to, when we got on the ship, let's see, it was fall because it was March. So it's fall in the south and it was beginning to get cool. And then as we continued toward the equator, obviously it got hotter and hotter, and then and the sun changes, and
Yeah. Yeah.
where you are on in the world, and what latitude, I mean, what longitude you're at changes, and then as we began to head north, it got cooler, and uh, then it was springtime, and trees are beginning to bud, and it was, it was a fascinating
It's awesome.
experience.
Bit strange. Yeah.
Yeah,
Another place that you've mentioned before, actually, earlier in the interview, is Svalbard in Norway.
yeah,
This place seems completely wild. I think there's got polar bears running around. I think you need a gun, right? I don't think there's any visa laws. It's quite a strange place by the sounds of it, but also must be quite awesome to experience because you get the very closed window of the daylight, right, between late morning
yeah.
and early afternoon.
That was really interesting to go there. It's the northernmost uh, human habitation on Earth, and so there aren't very many people. There are 2,000 people in Longyearbyen, which is where we were. Svalbard itself is part of, I think this is the way it works, is part of Spitsbergen, or it might be Spitsbergen as part of Svalbard, but there's a big archipelago up there,
Mm.
and then there's a large island, and I think that's Svalbard. And then there's this town called Longyearbyen, and mostly it was, even the only reason there's anybody there was for coal and metal. And that was a place that was mined heavily. But and so it was mostly just miners up there in these towns. And there's a couple of Russian towns. There's still one Russian town called Pyramiden that is owned by Russia. But you can go in from Norway because it is now controlled by Norway or owned by Norway, however you want to put it. And yeah, when you get there, it's barren. It's just ice and hills. And we were there in at the beginning of the winter. Well, it was really the end of autumn.
Mhm.
And so the days it was like 4 hours of daylight. There's nobody really there. I went to the little tourist office there, so I went there. Cyndy and I went there, and I said, "Well, where could I, hike back in here and explore a bit?" And the woman said, "Well, you can do that." She said, "But you have to take a rifle." And I said, "Oh, well, that would be a bad idea. I'd probably shoot myself or somebody else if I had a rifle." And she goes, "Well, you have to have it because of the polar bears." And they have an unwritten rule there that any door or car door or house or apartment is left open, in case you see a polar bear, because as one hunter put it to me, he said, "You can hunt other bears," he said, "but polar bears hunt you." 2 years earlier, they had disemboweled a guy that was sleeping out, down near the airport. Uh, so you don't want to mess with them.
Yeah.
They'll actually come around and like they'll walk along like they're outside the town, like they're just going by,
Mhm.
but they're actually checking you out, and they're super bright and incredibly powerful. And if you get in the way of one, you just take your head off with one swipe. Luckily, we never actually ran into any, but we also were careful not to be just, lollygagging around out there.
So do they sometimes go into town just trying their luck, like trying to get into
Yeah,
places? Is that what they do?
apparently that's what happened to this guy. He was camping outside, but he was by the airport, so he was pretty close to a populated area.
Yeah.
Yeah, he came in, and you know, they're in trouble. Polar bears are in trouble because of global climate change, and
Sure.
there's not as many ice flows and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So they're actually learning to they like to kill seals,
Yeah.
but they're actually learning. Was one scientist up there told me they're learning to kill reindeer. And what they do is they herd the reindeer into the sea and wait for them to freeze to death, and then they haul them out and they eat them. But until very recently, they never worried about. They never. It was too much trouble to try to track them down.
Yeah.
Because they're fast. They
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
they,
Yeah.
you can go 30, 40 miles an hour, but it's a lot of trouble. So they didn't want to really chase them down. But now they found this other way to kill them.
Mental. And Svalbard, in terms of the people, what is the like mix of people there now? Because obviously mining, is that still existing or is that completely finished now? And who's actually left?
Yeah, it's pretty much finished. I mean, mostly
Okay.
now there are people that are starting to go there as tourists, or they're interested in exploring it. There is a place there that's interesting, and one of the reasons I wanted to go was the World Seed Bank is located there.
Okay.
So there's a huge vault there that has where they're building a library of every seed in the world, just in case there's an epidemic, or whether there's war, or some kind of pestilence, but whatever, it's there as a backup. So we went up there, and you can't go inside of it. They won't let you go inside of it because they worry about germs and that sort of thing. But we were able to. It turned out that whenever I got there, they were a group from India and Africa were bringing seeds in, so it was open.
Huh.
But it's just basically a doorway that goes into the mountain, and then there's a huge vault back in there, and that's where they keep all the seeds. But otherwise, it's there's students there because they'll go there to study glaciology or meteorology. And because there are more tourists, there are, a couple of hotels. And so people work there, and a couple of restaurants, and they work there. But there's only 2,000 people there. And interestingly, when you go there, you get provided a place to live, but you can't like move there and say, okay, I'm moving here. You either have to have a job, and then you're
Right.
provided a place to live,
Yeah.
or you're a tourist. Otherwise, so long.
Polar bears, they don't hibernate. So I think they're awake all year round, unlike the bears
Yeah.
here, which go to sleep during the winter. So that's a
Yeah,
big difference, right?
they're always out there, and I can't imagine. I mean, we were there at the end of October, and it's so quiet, and there's just nothing much to do. I mean, we had a few days there that we could do things. There's a really nice museum there, actually, and you could see the seed bank and just walk around and kind of gawk at, where you were. But I mean, it's huge, huge mountains. But when it comes, wintertime, and I think for over like 6 weeks, there's nothing but dark. And because you're way up there, 75 degrees latitude. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not much further before you get to the pole. And, it's got to be difficult. I talked to some other people, and some of them said, yeah, I'm good for a year here, and then I'm gone. I can't stay here that long.
Well, I think we had the similar experience in the Yukon. We went to Whitehorse in Yukon in Canada, which
Yeah.
is like level with Alaska, right? For a week. And you're right, we done the dog sledding. We drove
Mhm.
around, saw the little towns in the snow because obviously it's winter time and it's minus 30 degrees Celsius. But I'm thinking,
Yeah.
what else do you do apart from work if you live here? Especially in the winter when it doesn't really get light until 11 a.m. and it goes back probably at 3 p.m., maybe 4 p.m. if you're lucky. But yeah, it's a
Yeah.
crazy experience. But also, I guess that's why they offer incentives financially, right? They give you like 20% more in terms of salary. They give you an allowance per year to fly back to Vancouver, wherever you need to go, right, to see family. So they try and
Yeah.
incentivize. But yeah, in terms of day to day, if you're an indoor person, then great, I suppose. But if you're an outdoor person, in the summer you are surrounded by other bears, which is cool, but got to be aware of them. And in the winter, it's minus 30. So Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
crazy place.
There was one woman I talked to, and I said, how long have you been here? And she said 30 years. And I said, so how do you handle the winters? And she said, I just kind of hibernate. She goes, I'm good with it,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah,
then I talked to other people that said I can't take it, I'm
yeah.
done. So I again, different strokes for different folks, I guess, but it's it's definitely different. But like we found that it was easy to sleep in until 10 o'clock because
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
and we sort of start to get, sleepy, around 4 or 4:30 because your body was basically saying it's time to go to sleep. But yeah, it's a very weird feeling because your timing is completely off. You're going, well, it must be 10 o'clock at night. No, it's 5 o'clock. And so, but it was just again one really interesting part for you too, in the Yukon, just one more interesting part of the experience, and,
Yes.
and it's all part of satisfying that curiosity where you say, "Wow, that was different." Uh, glad glad I experienced it, and that's good enough, It's just a more interesting thing to learn.
Yeah, we had a crazy Airbnb host. I think I've told the story a few times in the podcast, but he had a
Mhm.
shotgun and he woke us up at middle of the night because the Northern Lights were out. So he got
Yeah.
us, he gave us a beer at 1 a.m. I was like, oh, no, I've just woken up. It's fine. Jumped on a ski mobile, which I'd never driven before. So I'm learning for the first time in minus 30 degrees in the middle of the night at 1 a.m. And we
Yeah.
somehow make it out onto his lake. And he said, yeah, look there, there's Northern Lights. And there they were. Pretty
Ah,
incredible.
so you got to see the Northern Lights.
Yeah, yeah,
Amazing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, we were up in the Arctic Circle for a couple of weeks, and we never saw
Oh,
the Northern
wow.
Lights. Everywhere we went, it was like, well, oh, you just had them yesterday, or it was cloudy, or something. But we thought for sure we would see them for all the time we were spending up there. So you're lucky. I'm glad you got to see them.
Well, he said to us when we arrived, he said that if I notice they're out, he's a bit strange, right? I don't know if he's up all night or he works on the land, right? So he knows it pretty well. But he said if they're out and they're about, I'll wake you up. But we didn't really expect
Oh,
that to
perfect.
be a shotgun
Yeah,
outside of the cabin. But I think he tried to text us as well, but we were asleep, right? So my only
yeah,
advice would be to people listening, if you're like halfway asleep and it's like 2 a.m. and you get the call to go, just go. You don't want to go at the time because you have to get dressed, you're sleepy, it's minus 30 degrees. There's a bit of
yeah,
admin to get ready, right? But honestly,
yeah.
you just need to get through that and get out there, and then you won't regret it. Because I was almost at the point to say no. I was like, nope, I'm gonna stay in my cozy cabin and go to sleep. So I'm glad I said yes.
Yeah, you gotta do it when you get the chance because you don't know when you might get the chance again.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And for those places, I'd love to go. I don't know what you think, like flip it around and go in the summer and experience the long days, right? I want to see how that feels.
Right, because we were in Antarctica and we were in the summer, that I mean, the sun was setting like 10 o'clock,
Mm,
10:30 at night. So
yeah,
that was kind of cool. The days were very, very long, but we were in such an unworldly place that it kind of seemed to make sense in a weird
got it.
way.
Yeah,
The sun is different when you're way down there,
right.
because your perspective on the sun is different,
Mm,
than whenever you're in the middle of the world. You're at the tip of it, so
yeah, I imagine it.
it's all
I got one more place
okay.
that I picked out for your trip, and it's probably a bit more personal. This one is Monument Valley because when we were road tripping through America last year, that was on our list, but we didn't get time to go, and I kind of feel like I missed out a little bit. Is it as
Nice.
grand as you see on the photos where you got those huge monuments in terms of the rocks, right? And you're going through on that road that cuts through the middle, right? You get the classic image of the person standing on the road with
Yeah.
miles to see. Is it as good as visiting? And I had a question of who the Navajo people are as well.
Yeah. Well, I hate to say it because you didn't make it there yet. But yeah, it's more spectacular than it looks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's actually I wrote a pretty detailed dispatch about it, because it was such an experience, and for me, it was a place that I had always wanted to see. So I was so happy that we did see it. And then while we were there, well, first of all, the way the clouds move. Well, you have these huge, mesas in the middle a huge valley, and they're so spectacular looking. They're so, battered, and they've been changed by God knows what they've been through, and they're still standing there,
Mm.
and they're immense. So just seeing them, and then there's the clouds and the sun, the way they would hit them, it was spectacular. And we were there. It was cold and kind of rainy some days, and then some days it was sunny but chilly. And anyhow, we went in by road to explore, kind of in the valley. And then we were coming back. I saw a guy had a corral of horses. Right, I didn't see a guy; I just saw the corral of
Mm.
horses, and so I went up to them and I was kind of wandering around looking, and a woman came out and she asked me, what was up, and she was native, and I said, well, I see you have horses here. Is there any chance that we can ride with you?
Mhm.
So then she called her husband out. Jameson was his name. I think he has a Navajo name too. But so he came out and he said, "Yeah, sure. Just come on over tomorrow, and I'll take you out." And so turns out he was a shaman, just kind of a local priest
Okay.
or minister, and really cool guy, and almost had been killed by COVID. Uh,
Oh,
so
wow.
that was an interesting story. And he got us up on our horses, Cochise and Geronimo, and and we just went right into the valley, so we're
Wow.
like right next to some of these huge mesas. And he had a lot of great stories. He told us about how the Navajo people are the only Native Americans that were never controlled by the federal government. They're
Oh, okay.
they have the largest reservation. I mean, it's huge reservations. It's bigger than most states.
Hmm.
Huge reservation that they control, partly in Arizona, partly in I guess Colorado and New Mexico, maybe, and or Utah, and just really cool people, very calm, smart, wise man. And he took us through there, and I asked him, well, how did the Navajo, work? And they have hogans, which they don't use very much anymore, but they were almost portable ways to live, and spread out really really far. He said whenever we hunted, we would hunt in small groups. He said we didn't hunt in large groups, and they were extremely good with on horse. Best one of the best horsemen in the world, and spears and arrows, bow and arrow, and so anyhow, he was just fascinating to talk with. And again, I think the dispatch kind of goes into his whole philosophy of how he takes care of people and how people sometimes can be difficult to take care of, and his story of COVID. And then very briefly, I'll tell you the weird thing was I had mentioned something online about this, and a woman got in touch from Norway, uh, and said, "Oh my God, I'm so happy to hear that Jameson is okay because I haven't been able to get in touch with him."
Oh,
And
wow.
it turned out that she had gone there 30 years ago and lived with the Navajo and wrote a book about it and fell in love with Jameson.
Right.
And so she had stayed in touch with Jameson over the years, but she had lost track of him because of COVID, and only found out that he was okay through the story we wrote. And so then she went back and with her son and visited him and sent pictures back. So we have that story.
Crazy. That's mental.
Yeah, it's crazy. Really cool guy. It was a great experience. I mean, just riding the horses through that place was one of the best experiences I ever had.
They're the experts of the land, right? So they know the land's
Oh
inside out.
yeah,
I
yeah,
imagine they
yeah,
give you the best areas to go to, or whatever you're looking for, they can direct you and help you out, I'd imagine.
yeah, yeah. No, it was. I mean, you just sitting on the horse and going by, you're kind of just goggling.
Yes. Yeah.
Can't believe where you're at, and you want to try to remember, that experience and get it in your head and heart. So yeah, that was a wonderful experience. And if you go back, look for him,
Hmm.
go in or give me a ring,
Yeah.
and we'll find him. But his name is Jameson, and
Jameson.
he,
Okay.
he'll have several. And he by the way, these are all Mustangs, wild Mustangs that he and some of his family members broke. They were wild horses at one point.
Wow. Amazing people. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
On my list, that place to go back to. I think it's probably definitely top three, maybe even top in America, I think.
yeah. Utah, did go spend lots of time in Utah. It
Yeah.
blew us away. We spent 3 weeks there because we were so stunned by the beauty of it.
Mm. I think we brisked past it, maybe the north side. I can't remember now on the route.
Yeah,
Yeah. I kind of wish
yeah,
we made that a priority, unfortunately. But anyway, next time we've still got the camper van, so we'll drive down.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
Your packing gear, is it light because you're going for such a long time? Like, how do you
Yes.
travel in terms of that?
Yeah, we pack light. We carry one bag that's probably, I don't know, 2.5 feet wide. We have two of those. One is a bag that can be carried as a regular suitcase. It's canvas,
Hmm.
or it can be put on a backpack or backpack as a backpack. And then another one that's a roller that can be carried, but it also can be rolled. And they come in handy when you're in cities. And we pack very light, mostly with a lot of layers.
Hmm.
So, we just keep on, if we're cold, we just keep putting on more layers and we'll have a good rain slicker
Yeah.
uh, to help us with that. And then we carry two pairs of shoes, a pair of boots and a pair of, mostly just tennis shoes or,
Yeah.
walking shoes. And they seem to cover us. We have yet to, I mean, we were in Antarctica. When you're on the ship, they provide you with really heavy gear that keeps you warm uh, and keeps you dry. So we didn't have to worry about that, and we knew that. Uh, but otherwise, we never had a problem. No matter where we've been, and we've been in places like Morocco where it was well over 100 degrees, or we walked the Camino Way in Spain in
Oh
the
yeah,
summer,
nice. Mm.
and that was over 100 degrees. And then we've been in places like Svalbard where it was, 7 degrees Fahrenheit. These are all Fahrenheit numbers, by the
Yeah.
way. And so it was frigid, but we were all right.
Amazing. Related to your pack, separate question is, do you pack much tech with you? And kind of second part of the question is, do you work whilst you travel? Apart from the blogging of the travels, do you do much else?
Well, what I did was before we left, I got the best iPhone that I could, and I thought that's going to have to serve as my camera
Yeah.
because it just didn't have room for a bulkier camera, and also it's just something you have to lug around everywhere. So it was just easier to put something in the pocket. So that takes care of a lot of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, One thing that I didn't have and that I wish I had, but I've now bought is a good headset with a windscreen, because half the time whenever I would go to talk about some place that we were, it was like on a ship going
Yeah.
across the Drake Passage or something like that, and it was just you couldn't hear a thing. And then I think I'm going to invest in a drone, um,
Yes. Yeah.
and see if, because like in Morocco or places like that, I wish that I'd had a drone to get an aerial view. Well, there's a lot of places I wish that we had been able to get aerial views of some of the locations we were at. Have you done that?
No. Do you know what? That is probably my biggest regret in terms of tech for our trip last year was the drone, especially
Yeah.
traveling across Canada in the camper van and going from west to east, and the States as well, right? Going back across. But I kind of feel like we missed out on the aerial stuff there, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um,
So I think,
Yeah.
I mean, there's some really small ones, and
Yeah.
that's the biggest problem for us is will we have the room? But one of the good things is we'll be moving through, pretty warm. We'll be heading toward the equator, so um, probably won't need to be carrying boots. Uh, I don't think. We'll see.
Right.
So that might provide a little more room, but I think there's enough space. One of the things that's nice about the canvas bag is, I mean, it's amazing how much stuff you can stuff in there. And then we also carry a day pack, so we can pull the day
Yeah.
pack out and throw it on for the day, which, you know, provides some relief.
Yeah, the drone thing is interesting. Like my friend who used to work in post-edit stuff back in the UK in London, he would say drone footage, as it's coming through, this is like quite a few years ago now, was the number one thing that people would want to see. And I don't think it's a be or end all, but if you want filler content or at least to show a different angle, it's got to be some of the best you can do, right? Get that drone footage up there and just,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I
it's
wish
incredible.
some of the places in Utah
Yeah,
or
yeah.
just or Patagonia,
Oh, wow.
would have been spectacular. Just a different point of view,
Yeah.
Uh, so we'll see. I've got a friend who's pretty good with that stuff, so he's put me onto a good piece of tech. Which a
Nice.
name I can't remember. It's got a lot of numbers.
I think you have to learn as well, don't you? You can't really wing that much, drone footage. I think camera you can wing, videoing, but getting the drone up there and getting used to the controls, I think that's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
bit
The,
of
the
learning you got
last
to
thing
do.
you want to do is spend a bunch of money on one and then have it go up and crash.
Yeah, yeah, devastating. Just quickly, can you remind people what is next for your trip, and then where can people find you on websites or social medias to keep track of your trip?
Yes. Well, okay. So we're going to head back and we're going to go to Trieste. We were very near Trieste whenever we departed and headed back home. Um, and we will probably mostly by train head down through Croatia, then grab some ships that'll bounce us along the Adriatic coast. We want to go to Montenegro because there's a friend that we met. That's one of the interesting things. We meet people all
Oh
along
yeah,
the way, and
no
then
one
we
talks about
meet,
that.
and,
Yeah,
and then we go home or go to their home and meet them in Switzerland or France or wherever they're from. Uh, and so this fellow we met on the way to Antarctica, he actually worked on the ship, and he lives in Montenegro. So we're going to go there and see him. And then we'll eventually work our way down to Greece and then into the Mediterranean, and then find, I don't know exactly how, away from Crete to Alexandria, and then up the Nile, and then from there into Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Oman, and then there's a ship that'll get us to Madagascar. I met a woman that was on the ship going across the Atlantic who is Malagasy, and so she's already set us all up. She's
Hmm.
given us
Wow,
names of
incredible.
people to see and places to get us around, because there's only one way to get around really, and that's by car
Yeah,
in Madagascar. But it has fascinating history, so
yeah, that place that looks just a bit
it's
wild.
wild. And we actually have to get the ship will take us to a place called Port Louis,
Yeah,
which is a tiny, tiny island. Have you been there? Heard about
no,
it?
but I've done an episode of Madagascar with someone
Yeah.
about over
So
a year
we
ago
have to
now. But
we have to take a ferry and then a yacht and see if we can jump on a yacht and get to Madagascar. And then the big question there is then, do we move into the interior of Africa or do we begin to head east? Uh,
right, yeah,
you know, and that's kind of a time issue more than anything. We're thinking maybe we'll come back for the silverback, uh, gorillas
hmm
just on our own on a separate trip.
cool.
And I have been to Tanzania. Not that it's not worth going again. It's a spectacular place.
Sure. It's on my top five list, I think, Tanzania. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Do it. And make sure you get to Ngorongoro Crater.
Okay.
It's
Hot tip.
Yeah. And then as far as places to see what we're up to, There's really two websites. One is Vagabond Adventure. Don't forget the dash, adventure.com, where you'll find recommendations, tons of information, uh, pretty much hundreds and hundreds of, probably thousands of pictures as we've traveled, a good deal of video, and lots of articles because I am a writer. And a lot of those articles are there to help people, so that they can. There's two kinds. One are kind of self-help articles, and the others are stories. The dispatches that I talk about.
Yeah.
And then there's www.chipwalter.com, and that's where you learn about my books and my writing and National Geographic articles and stuff like that. And of course, we're also on Facebook as Vagabond Adventure and Chip Walter, author Chip Walter, and Instagram, and it's Chipperoo.
Yes, I'll put the links of those in the show notes. And I checked out most of your Vagabond website. The amount of content on there is insane. So if people want to literally search any of those 600 days, I think there's going to be something on there. I think you divide it out into regions of the world. So much stuff on there to check out. And I've barely touched the surface. I read a few articles and dispatches and stuff. So yeah, amazing website. Yeah.
Thank you. We put a lot of time into it, and so is yours. It's a really nice website. So we'll be sure to let people know about yours as well.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Thanks so much. Okay. I have a sort of 5-10 minute feature at the end, which is just quick fire travel questions. These can be hard for travelers like yourself who've been to quite a lot of places. So don't get angry, but there's going to be like more of your favorite stuff worldwide. I'm going to kick off with.
It's travel question time.
I usually say countries, but I'm going to say places. What's your top 3 favorite places that you visited of all time?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is really hard. Unfair question.
Yes. I'll give you 3 though, not 1. So
I know. Yeah, that's true. Your argument is 3. Okay. I had given it some thought. Boy, it's still hard. Definitely Torres del Paine in Patagonia.
Yeah.
Spectacular. Just got to go there. Anybody. Antarctica, and either Morocco or Monument Valley.
Oh, wow.
Can't decide which ones. Morocco has so much history. The people are so fabulous. The food is unbelievable. And I've been writing dispatches. I thought I would write the dispatches, 2 or 3 dispatches. I think I'm on my 5th or 6th one. There's just so much stuff there. We had a terrific time.
Okay. My next question is, tomorrow, if you've gone on a trip to 3 different countries you've not traveled to before, and they could be anywhere in the world, which 3 countries are you going to travel to?
Tibet, Bhutan, and either Vietnam or Cambodia.
Okay. And if you could pick one country in the world to live there for a year, starting tomorrow, where are you going to live? That's not USA.
Yeah. I think I would choose Thailand.
Yeah, good shout.
Thailand.
Okay. And what are your top 3 favorite cuisines worldwide?
Well, if you're talking about something called a thunder cake, that's Newfoundland, which is a spectacular berry pie.
Okay.
The tangine of Morocco.
Nice.
I mean, the best food in the world, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And any good French restaurant. Lyon, we were in Lyon, and that's a really great food there. So, but I can't say like a specific meal because it's all good.
Yeah,
so
yeah, that's fine.
Whatever they do, they just know how to do it.
Yeah, the French are good. Okay, if you could sit for an afternoon somewhere with a cup of coffee and watch the world go by, where are you going to sit?
Antarctica. Just being on the ship, just sitting there outside, bundled up, with
cozy coffee.
hot chocolate
Yeah.
and just going by as you're watching these huge icebergs and glaciers and mountains.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
insane.
but that'd be fine.
Wow. Okay. You kind of mentioned some of these, but I'm going to have to give you three favorite landmarks. They can be man-made or nature.
Okay, well, that Monument Valley,
Mhm.
uh, for nature. Hungary, there's this wild place where these huge rocks were sculpted
Okay.
by a sculptor back in the 1800s, and they're still there. They're really hard to find, and we found them in the middle of it was snowing. It was a really interesting time. Play Norway or Svalbard. You know, it's just so wild there. And we haven't gotten to into Egypt or you know,
Mm.
or Thailand or Cambodia yet. So I'm sure that once we get there, there would be, and India, or Nepal, I'm sure those
Yeah.
would all be spectacular places, but we just haven't gotten there yet. Oh, I know what. I mean, for me personally, Cindy and I did go to the Great Wall of China, and
Oh,
we got
wow.
to
Yeah.
go out to an area that was not yet renovated. And so we were just way out there, and it was that blows your mind.
Hmm.
What that, I mean, you're looking at miles and miles and miles of these, uh, the wall
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
the crest of these mountains, and you just go, how the hell did they do that?
Yeah. It's on my list.
Yeah,
I would say if you get to Nepal, I think the Himalayas are pretty special. Uh, I think it's definitely in
yeah,
my top three for sure. Just sitting there again with a cup of coffee once you've done your hike and just looking
yeah,
around you. It's pretty spectacular.
yeah. I can imagine. Yeah. I'm looking forward to that. I'm jealous that you've already done it.
Twice. Yeah, I've been twice.
Good for you.
I think it's one of those countries you can go back to all the time, right? You can just go and justify it anytime.
Yes, right, right. Yeah, and it's again, you just wish you could snap your fingers sometimes and be there. You know.
Yes, absolutely.
But
So,
those are great questions because they're hard to answer.
are you a sunrise or sunset person?
Sunset, sunsets.
Next one's quite difficult, but I'm going to go with your favorite. It's a bit of a harsh word for this, but maybe three peoples. So you mentioned the Navajo earlier, but three peoples that you've met on your travels that are a group of people that you just have to meet if you can.
Yeah. Met a great guide, Ismail, in Morocco. Just this terrific kid who's loaded with enthusiasm and just talk and showed us all around the Atlas Mountains and Marrakesh uh, and Merzouga, which is where the dunes, the beginning of the Sahara is,
Hmm.
and uh, there's Michelle and Silky, uh, who we met. Actually, we originally met in Morocco, but they're Swiss, and they have traveled all over South America. They have sailed the Pacific on their own ship. Uh, so they're just, really fascinating people. And wow, there's a lot of different people that we've met. I got to say, I really enjoyed Jameson.
Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
Navajo.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, he was just such a centered human being. It seemed to me.
Okay. And a couple more questions. As you're from the States, have you visited every state, or is there a state you've not visited that you'd love to check out?
Well, I think I've been in every state.
Got it.
Uh, you know, some of them I might have been, kind of going through because I was in on an airport or something like that. I might
Mm.
have missed North. No, I've been to North Dakota, so I think I've hit them all.
Okay. And what does home mean to you?
Well, this is going to sound a little hokey, but actually, home for me is wherever my wife is. And I mean, there is home in the sense that you have a base,
Mm.
and sort of, but to me, it's always a place that you're going to be leaving from. And also for me, home is a place where I write, where I can really dig in and write. And that's probably the most comfortable thing for me. Uh, our children have all, they're all over the place. So anywhere we're visiting them is also home and away. But I've moved so many times and, changed, my careers multiple times that I guess I'm not really tied to any one place. I do love Pittsburgh, but there's not a particular building or house or apartment that I'm married to. So I would say if I'm with my wife and I can write, I'm a happy man.
Okay. And that leads me to my last question is if someone's listening right now who's nervous about traveling, whether that is going international travel or even just going to like a different state if they're in US, what words of advice or wisdom can you pass on to say why they should go and take that leap?
Oh, well, I love that question because people should travel because it broadens your perspective. I mean, you begin to see instantly that the world is so much more interesting, so much bigger than you are and the whatever world you've been living in. And there'll be so many experiences that you'll have. A lot of people have fears. We have never, in all of these 120,000 miles that we've traveled, run into anybody that was even a jerk, let alone dangerous. So I think a lot of people worry about that. Travel slows time and obliterates hatred. It humbles you, and at the same time you're learning, you're also realizing how little you know, and that's humbling in a good way. And the people that we've met that have traveled, all over the place, much more than we've traveled even, they always are humbled. They're not arrogant. They're not like, oh, look what I know, because they realize how little they know. And that's okay. It just means there's more out there to learn about. So that's what I would say to people. You'll love it if you do it.
Chip, that's an amazing way to finish the conversation. It's been a great chat. I think there's so much more stuff to learn from you in terms of your either career experiences or your books or your travels and your future travels coming up. So you're welcome back at any time. And I think it's a truly fascinating story, what you've given us today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It was great to chat. It was great questions. I really appreciate it. And I would love to come back anytime you want to have us back. We'll try to put a few more miles under our belt.
Yeah, let's reconnect when you come back from your next stint. That'd be quite an interesting story to hear, right? Because that sounds like an amazing trip we've got coming up from September.
Yeah, the Nile is going to be, that's one of my places I'm really excited about.
Sure, yeah, amazing. Yeah, we'll get you back on and see how that trip's gone.
Okay. Well, thanks again, and thanks for including me, and I'm looking forward to learning more from you too.
Thank you. Cheers. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to the podcast episode today. If you've been inspired by today's chat and want to book some travel, if you head to the show notes, you'll see some affiliate links below which help support this podcast. You'll find Skyscanner to book your flight. You'll find booking.com to book that accommodation. Want to stay in a super cool hostel? You'll see Hostelworld down there too. You'll find Revolut to get your travel card sorted. Click the GigSky link to get your eSIM ready for your trip. And more importantly, you'll find Safety Wing Insurance to get that travel insurance for your trip. There are many more to check out, so when you click that link and book your product, a small commission goes towards me and the Winging It Travel podcast. Thank you in advance and enjoy your travels.